The wail wasn't just a sound, it was an infestation. It echoed from the marble floors of the Sinclair penthouse, a 3-story marvel overlooking Central Park, and seeped into the very fabric of their billion-dollar life. For 3 months, Oliver Sinclair, the newborn heir to a global shipping empire, had not known a single hour of peace. His cries were a storm that no specialist could calm, no high-tech snoo could rock away, and no fortune could silence. Victoria, his mother, was a ghost in her own home, her beauty frayed by exhaustion. Donovan, his father, saw the child not as a son, but as a flaw in his perfect world. They had tried everything. And then Imani, the new maid, hired out of desperation, a woman as silent as the baby was. Loud leaned over the solid gold crib. She looked at the screaming infant, and as the storm of sound reached its peak, she whispered a single, impossible word. And the world went silent. The Sinclair penthouse was a monument to control. Every piece of art, from the Rothko in the foyer to the Coons sculpture on the terrace, was meticulously chosen. Every investment Donovan Sinclair made was calculated to the 10th decimal point. His life was a fortress of order, and his new son, Oliver, was meant to be the crowning jewel, the living proof of his dynasty. Instead, Oliver was a tiny red-faced demolition crew sent to dismantle his father's sanity, one shriek at a time. The crying had begun as a typical newborn fuss, but it had mutated into something monstrous. It was a high, piercing wail that vibrated through the triple-paned soundproof glass. It wasn't the cry of hunger or pain or a wet diaper. The army of pediatricians and specialists flown in from Zurich and Tokyo had confirmed that. Dr. Albright, a man whose fees could fund a small nation, had called it non-specific, persistent hyper-distress. To the staff who walked around with pained expressions and noise-cancelling headphones, it was simply the sound. Victoria Sinclair, a woman once photographed for the cover of Vogue, now looked like a tragic heroine in a Victorian novel. Her blonde hair was scraped back into a messy bun, her silk pajamas were stained with spit-up, and dark bruised circles hollowed out her eyes. She'd tried everything breastfeeding formula from 3 different continents, ancient swaddling techniques, a sound machine that played everything from whale songs to the recorded heartbeat of a Tibetan monk. Nothing worked. The moment she picked Oliver up, he would scream as if her touch were acid. Donovan treated the situation like a hostile takeover. He threw money at it. He had the nursery redesigned by a feng shui master, installed a military-grade air purification system, and even hired a baby whisperer from California who charged $5,000 a day to chant and wave crystals over the crib. The baby only cried louder. "This is unacceptable," Donovan stated one evening, his voice a low growl. He stood in the doorway of the nursery, a masterpiece of muted greys and blues, looking at his wife jiggling the screaming infant. "This is a failure of management. He's a baby, Donovan, not a quarterly report." Victoria snapped her voice, cracking. "I don't know what else to do. Maybe there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with the situation." He corrected his gaze, falling on the child with a chilling lack of affection. "Fix it." That was the edict that led to Imani. The agency had sent over a dozen nannies, highly qualified women with degrees in early childhood development and glowing recommendations from royalty and tech moguls. One by one, they fled defeated by the relentless screaming. The head of the agency, a frazzled woman named Mrs. Gable, finally called with a different kind of suggestion. "Her name is Imani Lawson," she'd said, her voice hesitant. "She's not our usual profile. No formal certifications. She's older. A widow. Mostly worked in hospitals' hospice care. But she has a reputation. They say she has a gift for peace. Desperate Victoria had agreed. Imani arrived the next day. She was a tall, statuesque woman in her late 50s, with skin the color of rich coffee and kind, knowing eyes that seemed to hold a deep, settled quiet. She wore a simple navy dress and carried a small, worn leather bag. She didn't gush or offer a litany of her skills. She simply stood in the grand foyer and waited. Matilda Sinclair Donovan's formidable mother was there to inspect the new arrival. Matilda, with her perfectly coiffed silver hair and diamond-encrusted everything, viewed the world as a series of assets and liabilities. Right now, both the baby and his mother were firmly in the liability column. "You're the one they sent, Matilda?" asked, her eyes sweeping over Imani with undisguised skepticism. "You have experience with infants of this caliber." "I have experience with people in distress, ma'am." Imani replied, her voice calm, and even a stark contrast to the shrieking that echoed from upstairs. For 2 days, Imani simply observed. She moved through the penthouse with a quiet efficiency that made her almost invisible. She cleaned, she organized, she prepared meals for Victoria that the younger woman was too stressed to eat. She never flinched at the sound. She would just pause, close her eyes for a moment, and continue her work. On the 3rd night, the crisis reached its zenith. Oliver had been crying for 10 straight hours. Victoria was sobbing in her room, and Donovan had locked himself in his study, the bass of some classical music vibrating through the door. The night nurse, a young, competent woman named Jenna, was at her wits' end. Imani entered the nursery. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a smart light, cycling through calming hues of blue and lavender. Jenna was rocking the crib so hard it threatened to come loose. The baby's face was a blotchy, furious crimson, his tiny body rigid with the force of his screams. "Let me," Imani said softly. It wasn't a question. Jenna, exhausted and grateful, stumbled back. Imani approached the crib. It was a ridiculously expensive piece of furniture, rumored to be plated in 18-karat gold. She looked down at Oliver, her expression unreadable. She didn't reach for him, didn't shush or coo. She just watched him, her gaze intense and focused, as if she were seeing something beyond the noise, beyond the rage. She leaned in close, her lips almost touching his tiny ear. The wail was deafening at this proximity, a physical force. Victoria, drawn by the sudden change in energy, appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of misery. Imani took a soft breath. She whispered a single word. It was quiet, swallowed by the storm of the baby's cry. Yet it seemed to possess a physics of its own. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Oliver's scream hitched. His body, once rigid, went limp. His eyes, squeezed shut in fury, fluttered open. He took a shuddering gasp of air, not to fuel another cry, but to fill his lungs in peace. A tiny frown creased his brow as he stared up at the woman above him. Then his eyes drifted shut. He was asleep. Genuinely, deeply, peacefully asleep. The silence that descended upon the nursery was more profound than any sound. It was heavy, thick, and utterly baffling. Jenna stared, her mouth agape. Victoria stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, a mixture of disbelief, relief, and a terrifying nascent suspicion. What had she just witnessed? What word, what single utterance could possess such power? She hadn't quite heard it, but she had seen the shape of it on Imani's lips, a soft, 2-syllable sound that had performed a miracle, and in the process cracked the very foundation of her perfect, miserable life. The morning after, what the staff would forever call the silence. The atmosphere in the Sinclair penthouse was electric. It was the first time in 3 months that the sun had risen without being heralded by Oliver's cries. The quiet was a tangible presence, a guest that no one knew how to entertain. Donovan Sinclair emerged from his study, looking rested for the first time in weeks. He found Victoria sitting in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee, her eyes fixed on the baby monitor. On the small screen, Oliver slept his tiny chest, rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. His quiet Donovan stated a note of incredulous approval in his voice. He poured himself a coffee, his movements crisp and efficient. The new woman, Imani, she handled it. Victoria nodded, her throat tight. Yes, she did. Good. Pay her a bonus. Double her salary if you have to. I don't care what it costs. I want this result to be permanent. He spoke of his son's peace as if it were a stock performance to be maintained. He took a sip of his coffee. What did she do? I don't know. Victoria lied the words, feeling like ash in her mouth. I was in my room. By the time I came out, he was asleep. She couldn't bring herself to describe the moment. It felt too intimate, too strange. To say she leaned over and whispered one word sounded like madness. It sounded like something she couldn't explain, and in the Sinclair world, anything that couldn't be explained was a threat. But Matilda Sinclair was not so easily satisfied. She arrived mid-morning, a perfectly tailored whirlwind of Chanel and suspicion. She marched straight to the nursery, where Imani was quietly folding baby clothes. Oliver was still asleep in his bassinet. You, Matilda, began foregoing any greeting. The agency said you had a gift. What is it precisely? Some sort of folk remedy. A pressure point. Imani turned, her expression serene. I just helped him feel calm, Mrs. Sinclair. Don't be deliberately obtuse, Matilda snapped. The night nurse said you whispered something to him. What was it? What did you say? I told him he was safe, Imani said, her voice smooth and unrevealing. It was a plausible lie, but it didn't have the ring of truth. Matilda's eyes narrowed into slits. She was a woman who had built an empire alongside her late husband by reading people, by finding their weaknesses and their secrets. Imani's calm felt like a shield. My grandson is the heir to a significant fortune. We are very particular about the influences around him. I will not have any strange New Age nonsense performed on him. Whatever you did, you will explain it to me. In detail. There is nothing to explain, Imani replied, turning back to her folding. The baby is at peace. Isn't that what matters? The polite defiance was like a gauntlet thrown. Matilda, unused to being stone-walled by anyone, let alone an employee, felt a surge of cold fury. This wasn't just a maid. This was an unknown variable. A variable that had succeeded where millions of dollars in modern medicine and technology had failed. That made her powerful. And in Matilda's world, unexplained power was the most dangerous thing of all. Over the next few days, a strange pattern emerged. Whenever Oliver started to fuss before his cries could escalate into the familiar house-shaking storm, Imani would appear. She would scoop him up, hold him close, and murmur into his ear. Victoria watched from a distance, trying to decipher the word. It was soft, almost a breath. Gabri. Something like that. Each time the effect was the same. The baby would instantly relax, nestling into Imani's arms as if she were the only source of safety in the world. Victoria's initial relief began to curdle into something more complex, a bitter cocktail of jealousy and fear. Why did her son, the child she had carried for 9 months, find solace in a stranger's word and not in her own arms? She tried to hold him, to soothe him herself. But the moment Imani was out of sight, Oliver's distress would begin to build again. She felt like a failure, an imposter mother in her own home. One afternoon, she cornered Imani in the hallway. "What are you saying to him?" She demanded, her voice a raw whisper. "I have a right to know. I'm his mother." Imani looked at Victoria, and for the first time, Victoria saw a flicker of something profound in the older woman's eyes. It wasn't pity, but a deep, sorrowful understanding. "I am just reminding him of a connection," Imani said, her choice of words deliberate and strange. "A connection that makes him feel safe. A connection to what, to you," Imani held her gaze. "To a feeling of love," she answered simply, before turning and walking away, leaving Victoria with more questions than answers. The jealousy was bad enough, but the fear was worse. Donovan, content with the silence, didn't question the methods. But Victoria's mind raced. Was Imani hypnotizing him? Was this some kind of voodoo? Her thoughts grew more frantic. The world of the ultra-rich was filled with tales of grifters and charlatans who preyed on the desperate. What if Imani was creating a dependency, making herself indispensable so she could extort them later? Meanwhile, Matilda had moved from suspicion to action. She made a call to a man she kept on a discreet retainer, a private investigator named Martin Finch. Finch was a former Scotland Yard detective, a man who specialized in unearthing the secrets of the wealthy and powerful. "I want to know everything about her," Matilda commanded. Over the phone, her voice like ice. "Imani Lawson. Where she was born, where she has worked, who her family is, every penny she has ever earned. I want to know what she had for breakfast this morning. I want to know who she is. And more importantly, I want to know what she wants." Finch, accustomed to such requests, simply replied, "Consider it done, Mrs. Sinclair." The miracle of the silence had passed. Now the investigation had begun. In the quiet, opulent halls of the Sinclair penthouse, a storm of a different kind was brewing, and at its center was a woman who held a baby and a secret word that had the power to calm him or to destroy them all. Martin Finch was a man who moved through the digital world like a ghost. He left no trace, but he saw everything. He was a creature of databases, back-alley information brokers, and the dark corners of the internet. For him, a person was not a soul, but a collection of data points waiting to be connected. The file on Imani Lawson, he presumed, would be a simple one. A domestic worker? A widow? He'd have it wrapped up in 48 hours. He was wrong. The initial search was just as he expected. Imani Lawson, born Imani Adebayo, in a small town in Georgia. Married Joseph Lawson, a longshoreman in her early 20s. Lived a quiet life in Baltimore. Joseph died of a heart attack 10 years ago. No children. Her employment history was a patchwork of domestic and caregiving jobs, mostly for elderly clients. Her financials were clean, a modest pension, a small savings account. She was on the surface exactly who she claimed to be. But Finch was good at his job because he looked for the gaps. And there was a significant gap, a 2-year period about 3 years ago, where Imani Lawson seemed to have vanished. No employment records, no credit card activity, no rental agreements. It was as if she had ceased to exist. He dug deeper. He pulled phone records from the periods before and after the gap. He cross-referenced calling patterns looking for numbers that appeared frequently, and then stopped. One number stood out. It was a burner phone, but the calls were always pinging off cell towers in the same upscale neighborhood of Manhattan, an expensive neighborhood. Finch ran a reverse search on addresses in that sector associated with other numbers on her call log. He found it. A service entrance landline for a luxury condominium building on the Upper West Side. It wasn't the Sinclair building. It was somewhere else entirely. Finch felt the familiar thrum of the hunt. This was the loose thread. Meanwhile, at the penthouse, Matilda was conducting her own less subtle investigation. She would appear at random times, observing Imani with hawk-like intensity. She'd ask pointed questions disguised as casual conversation, "That's a lovely lullaby you're humming, Imani," she said one afternoon, startling the woman as she rocked Oliver on the terrace. "Is it a family song?" Imani didn't miss a beat. "It's just an old song, ma'am." "And your family?" Matilda pressed. "You have relatives in the city?" "No, ma'am. It's just me. A woman all alone." "That must be difficult," Matilda said, her tone dripping with false sympathy that was sharper than any accusation. "It makes one vulnerable, or perhaps resourceful." Imani simply smiled a small, sad smile and continued to rock the baby, who was gurgling happily in her arms. The atmosphere was affecting Victoria. The constant quiet, which should have been a blessing, now felt menacing. It was a quiet that belonged to Imani, not to her. She found herself watching the nanny on the baby monitor, obsessing over her every move. She saw the genuine affection Imani had for Oliver, and it terrified her. She was losing her son to this woman, this stranger. Her anxiety led her to do something she never would have imagined. She went into Imani's room. It was a small, neat staff bedroom off the kitchen. It was Spartan, almost monastic. A single bed, a small dresser, a worn Bible on the nightstand. There was nothing to find. But as Victoria was about to leave, her eyes caught something tucked into the frame of the small mirror above the dresser. It was a photograph, faded and slightly creased. A picture of Imani looking younger, smiling broadly. Standing next to her was a young, handsome black man with a radiant smile and intelligent eyes. He had his arm around her. They looked happy. Brother and sister Victoria guessed. But it was the man who made her breath catch in her throat. There was something familiar about him. The shape of his eyes, the curve of his smile. She couldn't place it, but a cold dread washed over her. She took out her phone and, with trembling hands, snapped a quick, blurry photo of the picture before hurrying out of the room. That night she couldn't sleep. She scrolled through the photo on her phone, zooming in on the man's face. Who was he? Why did he feel so important? Her mind drifted back to a time before Oliver, before the stress and the misery. A time of champagne-fueled charity galas and weekend trips to the Hamptons. A time when Donovan's business partner was still alive. His name was Gabriel Knight. He had been Donovan's closest friend, the charismatic, brilliant other half of their business empire. He was the ideas man to Donovan's ruthless executioner. Everyone loved Gabriel. He had a light about him that drew people in. And then, a little over a year ago, there had been a tragic accident. A solo sailing trip off the coast of Maine. A sudden storm. They never even found the body. Victoria pulled up her photo gallery, her fingers scrolling back through the years. She found a photo from a company retreat in Aspen, a group shot. There was Donovan herself, and standing next to Donovan, smiling that same radiant smile, was Gabriel Knight. She held the phone with the Aspen picture next to the phone with the picture from Imani's room. Her blood ran cold. It was him. The man in the photo with Imani was a younger, less world-weary Gabriel Knight. The questions exploded in her mind, a chaotic fusillade of terror. What was Imani's connection to Gabriel? Why had she never mentioned it? Why was she here in this house, caring for this specific baby? And then the most terrifying question of all, the one she had buried deep in her subconscious for months, forced its way to the surface. She looked at her sleeping son on the monitor. She thought of his dark, curly hair, so different from her own blonde, and Donovan's straight brown locks. She thought of the shape of his eyes, which she'd told herself he'd inherited from a distant grandfather. She was lying to herself. She knew exactly who he looked like. At that same moment, miles away in his darkened office, Martin Finch was having his own breakthrough. He had finally put a name to the burner phone that kept calling Imani during her 2-year gap. The phone was registered to a shell corporation, but the corporation's director was a name Finch recognized: Gabriel Knight. Finch leaned back in his chair, the pieces clicking into place with grim satisfaction. Imani Lawson wasn't just a former caregiver to Gabriel Knight during some unknown illness or injury. That was the obvious conclusion. Their connection was far deeper. He ran a new search, a deep dive into genealogy records, cross-referencing Adebayo and Knight. And there it was, a birth certificate from Macon, Georgia. Mother Alice Adebayo, father unknown, child Gabriel Adebayo. Years later, an adoption record. Gabriel Adebayo adopted by the Knight family. Imani Lawson, born Imani Adebayo, wasn't his caregiver. She was his older sister. The ghost in the machine had a name, and he was the man who had been Donovan Sinclair's best friend. Finch picked up the phone to call Matilda. The maid wasn't just some random woman with a gift. She was intimately connected to the family's past, and her presence in that house was no coincidence at all. Imani knew they were watching her. She felt the weight of Matilda's stare, the nervous energy radiating from Victoria. She saw how the other staff members would fall silent when she entered a room. They saw her as a mystery, a miracle worker, a witch. They were all wrong. She was just an aunt. Her story didn't begin in the Sinclair penthouse. It began on a dusty porch in Georgia, with a little brother whose mind shone like a supernova. Gabriel was her shadow, her brilliant, beautiful boy. She was 10 when he was born, and with their father gone, and their mother working 2 jobs, she had raised him. She was the one who taught him to read, who marveled as he took apart old radios and put them back together better than before. She knew he was destined for a world beyond their small town. When the wealthy, childless Knight family, who summered nearby, took an interest in the prodigy from the wrong side of the tracks and offered to adopt him, to give him the education he deserved, her mother had agreed. Imani had cried for a week, a piece of her heart torn away. But she had let him go. For him, they never lost touch. Gabriel Knight, the tech genius and Wall Street wunderkind, never forgot the sister who had raised him. He called every Sunday. He flew her to New York for holidays, and he told her everything. He told her about his partnership with the driven, cold Donovan Sinclair. He told her about Donovan's beautiful, lonely wife, Victoria. At first, he spoke of Victoria with sympathy. "She's like a bird in a gilded cage, money," he'd say. Donovan adores the idea of her, but he doesn't see her. Over time, the sympathy deepened into something else. Imani heard it in his voice, a tenderness, a longing. She warned him. "Gabe, that's a dangerous road. That's his wife." "I know," he'd whisper over the phone. "But when we talk, it's like I'm the only person who speaks her language." Then came the affair. He confessed it to her in agonizing detail, torn apart by guilt and a love he never expected to find. It was a secret stolen thing, moments grabbed in art galleries, late-night conversations in quiet bars, a weekend in Paris under the guise of a business trip. He told her when it ended. Victoria, terrified of the consequences of losing her comfortable life, had broken it off. Gabriel was devastated. 2 weeks later, Victoria announced she was pregnant. Gabriel was ecstatic and heartbroken. He was convinced the child was his. The timing was too perfect. He wanted to confront her, to claim his child, but he was afraid of destroying her life, and of what Donovan, a man he knew to be possessive and utterly ruthless, would do. "What do I do? Money?" He had asked her, his voice thick with desperation. "You wait," she had counseled. "You be patient. The truth has a way of finding the light." But Gabriel never got the chance. His sailing accident happened a month later. Imani never believed it was an accident. Gabriel was a meticulous sailor. He knew the waters off Maine like the back of his hand. He wouldn't have been caught by a sudden storm. But there was no proof, just the cold dread in her heart that his death had been altogether too convenient. After his death, Imani was adrift. The light of her life was gone. Then she saw the announcement in a society magazine, the birth of Oliver Sinclair. She saw the first photos. And she knew. The baby had Gabriel's eyes. Her purpose became singular and sharp. She had to get to that child, her brother's son, her nephew. She liquidated her small savings, moved to New York, and began to build a new identity. She used her years of caregiving experience to get a job with a high-end domestic agency, patiently working her way up, building a reputation for being quiet, reliable, and gifted with difficult cases. She knew the Sinclair household was a pressure cooker. It was only a matter of time before they needed someone like her. When the call came about, an inconsolable baby, she knew her moment had arrived. The first time she saw Oliver, her heart broke and swelled at the same time. He was the living image of her brother as an infant. The incessant crying wasn't a medical condition. She knew it in her soul. It was a cry of disconnection. A baby who didn't recognize the sterile, anxious arms that held him. A baby who was missing a fundamental piece of himself. That night in the nursery, as she leaned over the crib, she wasn't performing a magic trick. She was giving him the only thing she had left of his father. A name. A sound that was encoded in his very DNA. She had leaned in close past the wall of his shrieking and whispered the truth. Gabriel. The name of his father. She had said it again and again in the days that followed. Not just the name, but stories. When she held him, she would murmur softly, so no one could hear. Your father was a brilliant man, little one. He loved the stars. He would have shown you constellations. Your father had a laugh that could fill a whole room, just like yours will someday. She was introducing a son to his father, forging the connection that had been stolen from them. Oliver wasn't being hypnotized. He was being loved. He was being told in the only language that mattered who he was. He was calming, because for the first time in his short, traumatic life, he was hearing the echo of his own soul. Now, as Victoria confronted her with a blurry photo on a phone screen, Imani felt no fear. Only a profound weariness and a surge of protective instinct. "Who is this?" Victoria demanded, her voice shaking, as she held up the photo of Imani and Gabriel. "What was your relationship with Gabriel Knight?" Imani looked from the phone to Victoria's terrified eyes. The charade was over. "He was my brother," Imani said, her voice quiet but resonant with the power of the truth. "My little brother." Victoria staggered back, one hand flying to her mouth. The implications crashed down on her all at once. Imani's presence, the baby's silence, the word. What did you say to him?" Victoria whispered, though she already knew the answer. "That night. The word you whispered." Imani held her gaze, her eyes full of the sorrow of a story that should have been beautiful, but had turned into a tragedy. "I told him his father's name," she said. "I whispered, Gabriel." The word hung in the air between them. Not a sound, but a living thing. A word made flesh sleeping peacefully in a golden crib just one room away, and Victoria Sinclair finally understood that the foundation of her life hadn't just been cracked. It had been built on a lie from the very beginning, and the walls were about to come tumbling down. The revelation struck Victoria not like a lightning bolt, but like a slow, creeping poison. Imani was Gabriel's sister. All this time, a woman who knew her most devastating secret had been living in her house, holding her child, holding their child. She stumbled back from Imani, her mind a vortex of panic. Why didn't you say anything? Why did you come here? He's my blood, Imani said, her voice firm, losing its deferential softness and gaining the strength of family. He's all I have left of my brother. I came here to be near him, to make sure he was safe. Safe? Victoria laughed, a hysterical, broken sound. You think any of us are safe now? Do you know what Donovan will do? He will destroy us. He will destroy me. Donovan's wrath is not my concern, Imani replied, her eyes cold. My nephew's well-being is. You were letting him suffer in silence, a stranger in his own home. I gave him the one thing he needed. Before Victoria could process the accusation, the click of expensive heels on the marble floor announced Matilda Sinclair's arrival. She swept into the room, holding a sleek tablet, her face a mask of triumphant fury. I knew it, she said, her voice dangerously low. She didn't look at her daughter-in-law but fixed her gaze on Imani. I knew there was something rotten about you. Martin Finch is extraordinarily thorough. She angled the tablet screen for Imani to see. It displayed a digital family tree with lines connecting Imani Adebayo to Gabriel Adebayo, now Knight. Gabriel Knight's sister Matilda hissed the words like a curse. You came into my son's house under false pretenses. What is this? Some kind of long con? Are you here for money? Revenge for your deadbeat brother? My brother was worth 10 of your son. Imani shot back her dignity, a shield against Matilda's venom. And I am here for my nephew. That is all. Matilda let out a short, incredulous laugh. Nephew, are you insane? That child is a Sinclair. He is my grandson. Is he? Imani challenged, her voice dropping, carrying the weight of an unassailable truth. Look at him, Matilda. Truly look at him. He has Gabriel's eyes, Gabriel's spirit, a spirit this house was crushing with its misery. Matilda froze her eyes, darting from Imani to Victoria, whose ashen face and panicked silence were a confession in themselves. Matilda, so skilled at reading, people read the truth in an instant. The affair she had long suspected, but could never prove. The whispers she'd heard about Victoria and Gabriel's friendship. It all coalesced into one horrifying reality. You, Matilda whispered, finally turning her full, unrestrained fury on Victoria. You tramp! You brought this filth into my family. You passed off another man's child as a Sinclair. Matilda, please! Victoria began, her voice pleading. Do not speak to me. Matilda commanded, her voice like the crack of a whip. You have defiled the Sinclair name. You have made a mockery of my son. She turned back to Imani. And you will be out of this house in 5 minutes. If you ever try to contact this family or that child again, I will use every ounce of my power to ruin you. You will be arrested for fraud, for harassment. You will never work again. You will cease to exist. Do you understand me? Imani stood her ground. For the first time since she'd arrived, she seemed to grow in stature, no longer a maid, but the matriarch of another broken family. I'm not going anywhere without my brother's son. He is not your brother's son. He is a legal document, a birth certificate that says Sinclair. Matilda shrieked, her composure finally shattering. And you are nothing. The argument, escalating in volume, had drawn an unseen audience. The door to the study which adjoined the main living area opened. Donovan Sinclair stood there, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his face a thunderous mask. He had heard everything. He didn't look at his mother or at Imani. His gaze, cold and utterly devoid of emotion, settled on his wife. Donovan. Victoria breathed, her face collapsing in terror. He walked slowly, deliberately, into the center of the room. The air crackled thick with dread. He stopped in front of Victoria, looking down at her as if she were a stranger, a distasteful insect. He said nothing. He simply lifted his hand and pointed toward the door. It was a gesture of absolute final dismissal. His mother had been loud and furious. His silence was infinitely more terrifying. It was the silence of a judge passing a sentence. He then turned his glacial gaze to Imani. "You said he has his father's eyes." Imani met his look without flinching. "Yes." "And the name?" Donovan continued his voice, a low, dangerous rumble. "The word you whisper, it's Gabriel." "Yes," Imani affirmed. Donovan looked towards the nursery, a room he had avoided for months. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes, pain, rage, betrayal. It was the look of a man whose entire world, every pillar of his legacy and his life, had been dynamited into dust. "Let's go see him," Donovan said, his voice chillingly calm. "Let's go see Gabriel's son." The words were a death knell. Victoria let out a choked sob and sank to the floor, her world completely and irrevocably unraveled. The confrontation was over. The judgment was about to begin. The walk to the nursery was the longest of Victoria's life. She trailed behind Donovan, with Matilda following her like a prison guard, and Imani walking with a solemn, powerful dignity. The penthouse, once a symbol of her achievement, now felt like a gilded tomb. Donovan pushed open the nursery door. The room was serene, the smart light casting a soft, oceanic blue. Oliver was awake, lying in his crib, babbling softly to a mobile of planets rotating above him. For a moment, he was just a baby, a beautiful, innocent child. Then, Donovan stepped up to the crib and looked down. The silence stretched thin and taut, ready to snap. Donovan's face was stone. He was studying Oliver, not as a father, but as an appraiser examining a forgery. He was searching for the ghost of his friend, his betrayer in the face of the child he had called his son. "I see it," he said, finally, his voice flat. It was a simple statement of fact, devoid of the volcanic rage everyone expected. The coldness was so much worse. "I see him." He turned away from the crib, his back to the child, and faced Victoria. All of it, he said, his voice still unnervingly calm. The late nights at the office, the charity meetings, the trip to Paris you took with your friends. It was all him, wasn't it? Victoria could only nod, tears streaming down her face. "Donovan, I was so lonely. You were never there." "Gabriel." He saw me. He saw an opportunity. Donovan corrected his voice, hardening the first crack in his icy facade. "He saw my wife, my life, and he took what he wanted. And you let him. You both stood in my house, drank my wine, and laughed at me behind my back. He took a step closer. And this child was your little secret. The ultimate betrayal, a cuckoo in my nest." "He's an innocent baby," Victoria cried, reaching for his arm. Donovan flinched away, as if her touch were repulsive. "Do not touch me." That thing he gestured to the crib without looking is not a baby. It is a symbol. It is the living embodiment of my failure. My failure to see the snakes I had welcomed into my home. "Donovan, what are you going to do?" Matilda asked, her voice laced with a mixture of vindication and apprehension. Donovan looked at his mother, then at Victoria, and finally his eyes settled on Imani. "First she goes," he said, pointing at Victoria. "Pack a bag. My driver will take you to your mother's. Your belongings will be sent later. Your lawyers will hear from my lawyers in the morning. We are done." "No, Donovan." "Please, my son Victoria," pleaded, scrambling towards him. "He is not your son anymore." Donovan declared, his voice booming with absolute authority. "He is a problem, an asset to be managed, and you have lost all rights to him. You are nothing to me. You are nothing to this family. Security guards, always discreetly present in the building, appeared at the door as if summoned by his very will. They flanked Victoria, their presence, a silent, immovable wall. Her pleas dissolved into hysterical sobs as they gently but firmly escorted her out of the room, her life in ashes. With Victoria gone, Donovan's attention turned to the remaining 2 women and the child. And now, he said, turning to Matilda, we fix this. We will say the child is ill, a rare genetic condition. We will send him away. A facility in Switzerland, perhaps. The best care, of course. He will be provided for discreetly for the rest of his life. But he will not be raised here. He will not carry my name. The Sinclair line, as far as the world is concerned, remains unbroken and pure. We will try again. A new wife, a real heir, an excellent plan, son, Matilda said, nodding with grim approval. But Imani stepped forward, positioning herself between Donovan and the crib. You will not send him away. Donovan laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You are in no position to tell me what I will and will not do. You are a domestic who lied her way into my home. I should have you thrown in jail. And you can try, Imani said, her voice ringing with a moral authority that seemed to stun him into silence. But the story of why I am here will be very interesting to the press. Don't you think billionaire Donovan Sinclair disowns infant son of late partner Gabriel Knight? It doesn't have the same ring to it as unbroken and pure, does it? It was a direct challenge. A threat. Matilda gasped, but Donovan simply stared at her, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. He was a man who understood leverage. What do you want, Imani? He asked, his tone shifting from autocrat to negotiator. Money, a trust fund for the boy. Name your price. I don't want your money, she said with disdain. Gabriel left his own money more than enough. Money you probably control now. She took a deep breath. I want him. Give me my nephew. Let me take him away from this cold, broken place and raise him. Let him be an Adebayo. Let him be loved. Donovan was silent for a long time. He looked at the baby in the crib who had started to fuss, his face scrunching up for a cry. He looked at the fierce, protective woman standing before him. He looked at the empire he had built, an empire now tainted by a secret he could either bury or acknowledge. To send the boy away was clean, but risky. Imani could talk. To let her take him was also risky. The boy would exist out in the world, a living reminder of his failure. But there was a third option. An option born not of mercy, but of a cold, twisted logic that only a man like Donovan Sinclair could conceive. No, he said finally. You will not take him. And he will not be sent away. He walked back to the crib where Oliver's fussing was escalating into a cry. He looked down at the child, and for the first time seemed to truly see him, not as a symbol of betrayal, but as a piece on the board. A legacy of a kind. He is Gabriel's son, Donovan said almost to himself. Gabriel helped me build this company. His blood, his work is in its foundations. He looked up at Imani. The boy will stay here. He will be raised as a Sinclair. He will inherit what his father helped to build. Matilda looked horrified. Donovan, you can't be serious. I am perfectly serious, he replied, his voice taking on a chilling new resolve. But he will not be my son. He will be my ward. A living tribute to my friend's memory, and a constant reminder of the price of betrayal. He turned his full attention to Imani. And you will stay. You are the only one who can keep him quiet. You will be his governess, his caregiver. You will raise him in this house. You will have everything you need. But you will be a prisoner here, just like him. You will raise Gabriel's son under my roof, and he will learn what it means to be a Sinclair, to be powerful, to be ruthless, and to never ever be deceived. It was a sentence more cruel than exile. He was creating a kingdom of ash where a child would be raised by his aunt in the house of the man who hated his parents, a living monument to a dead man's affair. Imani looked at the crying baby, then at the cold, calculating man who was now his master. She had come to protect her nephew. And she had, in a way. She had saved him from exile. But she had also just locked them both in a beautiful gilded cage for a lifetime. The years that followed were a study in cold, quiet order. The Sinclair penthouse, once a place of frantic, screaming chaos, became as silent and regulated as a monastery. Victoria was gone, erased from the family portraits and the society pages as if she had never existed. Her name was never spoken. She had been exiled, given a generous but airtight settlement that bought her silence and her permanent absence. Donovan Sinclair kept his word. Oliver was raised as Oliver Sinclair, the public heir to the empire. He was given the best of everything, the finest clothes, the most expensive toys, tutors from Oxford and Cambridge. But he was not given a father. Donovan treated the boy with a chillingly polite detachment. He was the warden of a legacy, not a parent. He would inquire about Oliver's studies, as he would a stock portfolio, his emotional distance, a constant invisible wall between them. Imani became the boy's entire world. She was no longer a maid. Her official title was Head of Child Development, a corporate-sounding phrase Donovan had invented. She had a suite of rooms, an unlimited budget, and absolute authority over Oliver's daily life. She was his mother, his teacher, his confidant, and his only source of genuine warmth. She kept her promise to her brother. She raised his son. She told Oliver stories about a brilliant man named Gabriel, who loved the stars and had a laugh that could fill a room. She didn't tell him the man was his father, not yet. The time for that truth would come, but it was a truth that had to be handled with care, for it was both a gift and a weapon. For now Gabriel was a benevolent mythical figure, a guardian angel in the stories a boy was told before sleep. Matilda remained a frosty presence. She saw the boy as a contamination, a permanent stain on the Sinclair name. But she was a pragmatist. Donovan had made his decree, and so she played her part, treating Oliver with a brittle, formal correctness during the rare family dinners that felt more like board meetings. As Oliver grew, the resemblance to Gabriel became undeniable. He had his father's quick, inquisitive mind, his easy charm, and his kind eyes. It was a source of constant, quiet pain for Donovan. To see the best parts of his friend, the friend he had once loved like a brother, resurrected in the child of his greatest betrayal, was a unique and unending torture of his own design. One evening when Oliver was 7, he came to Imani with a troubled look on his face. He had found an old magazine in the library, a business journal from years ago. On the cover was Donovan Sinclair and another man, smiling arms around each other. "Imani," he said, pointing to the picture of Gabriel. "This is the man from your stories, isn't it, Gabriel?" Imani's heart stilled. "Yes, little one. That's him. It says he was Mr. Sinclair's partner. His best friend, Oliver, said his brow furrowed. But he never talks about him. Why doesn't he ever talk about his best friend Imani? Knew this was the moment, the beginning of the questions she could not answer with stories anymore. She knelt and took his small hands in hers. "Some things, Oliver," she said gently, "are too full of pain for people to speak about. But it doesn't mean the love wasn't real." Later that night, Donovan was in his study, when he heard a soft piano melody drifting from the grand salon. It was a simple, melancholic tune, one he hadn't heard in almost a decade. It was Gabriel's favorite piece to play. He walked to the doorway. There at the massive Steinway sat Oliver, his small fingers carefully picking out the notes. Imani stood beside him, humming the tune, guiding him. The boy looked up and saw Donovan watching. He didn't smile, but his expression was open, questioning. In that moment, Donovan saw them both. The son and the father. The ghost and the heir. He saw the legacy he had tried to control to shape with anger and duty taking on a life of its own. He had intended to create a living monument to betrayal, but Imani, with her quiet love and steadfast devotion, had cultivated something else, entirely. She had raised a good boy, a kind boy. She had raised Gabriel's son. Donovan didn't say a word. He simply stood in the doorway, a silent, conflicted warden watching his charge. The past could never be erased, and the future of the Sinclair Empire would be carried by a boy who would one day have to learn the full tragic story of his birth. The house was still a gilded cage, but within it, thanks to the woman who had first whispered his father's name, a small, resilient soul was learning how to sing. And for the first time, Donovan Sinclair wasn't sure if he was the jailer or just another prisoner. The story of the Sinclair family isn't a fairy tale with a happy ending. It's a raw, complicated tapestry of love, betrayal, and the silent battles fought behind the closed doors of the powerful. An inconsolable baby's cry became the catalyst that exposed a web of secrets, forcing every character to confront the ghosts of their past. Imani Lawson, a woman armed with nothing but love, and a name proved that the deepest connections cannot be silenced by wealth or rage. She became the quiet guardian of a complicated truth. But what do you think? Was Donovan's decision a cruel punishment or a twisted form of justice? Could a child raised in such a gilded cage ever truly be free? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you were moved by this story of secrets and survival, please don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a gripping drama, and subscribe for more stories that uncover the extraordinary truths hidden in ordinary lives.